That evening, the sky felt a little cooler than usual. The soft village breeze carried a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I, Hadeea, had just put my little boy to sleep and sat quietly in the courtyard. Life was simple house chores, responsibilities, and a husband who worked hard all day just to keep our home running. But deep inside, there was always a quiet emptiness, something I never spoke about to anyone. That evening the air felt lighter than usual, carrying the scent of dust and quiet from the village fields. The sun had just begun to fade, leaving behind soft orange light that filled the courtyard. I had finished my chores for the day. My little boy was finally asleep beside me, his small chest rising and falling like calm waves. My husband would not be home until late, maybe around 9 or 10, the same as every night. He worked hard, and I admired that, but his tired silence had become part of our routine. We spoke little. There was love, yes, but also a distance that had quietly settled between us like the night breeze, gentle, unseen, yet always there. I sat on the charpai, looking at the sky, when suddenly my phone began to vibrate. The screen glowed with an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment. Who could be calling me at this hour? When I answered, I heard a soft, careful voice say, "Auntie Hadeea. It's me, Huma, Rihanna's friend." For a second, I froze. My niece, Rihanna, had told me about this girl once, then had stopped mentioning her completely. I knew they weren't talking anymore, and there had been some argument between them. I could still hear Rihanna's anger from that time. For a moment, I thought about ending the call, but there was something in Huma's voice, an uncertainty, almost like fear. That made me pause. I said, "Yes, Beta, what is it?" Her reply came slowly, as though each word had to find courage before leaving her lips. "I just wanted to talk, maybe for a little while." The village was quiet that evening. Even the crickets had gone silent, as if they were listening too. At first, the conversation was awkward. She spoke about random things, asked about my health, my family, and then finally, with a trembling sigh, she said, "Auntie, Rihanna must have told you. I hurt her, but I never meant to." That one sentence carried so much weight that I didn't know how to answer. Instead, I let her speak. She told me everything, how their friendship had started so simply, how small misunderstandings had grown like cracks between them, and how one day, without meaning to, both had stopped trying to fix it. As she spoke, I could feel the honesty in her tone. It wasn't the voice of someone defending herself, but of someone who just needed to be heard. I found myself listening with a strange kind of warmth. It reminded me of my own younger days, when friendships were pure and emotions unfiltered. I thought of Rihanna too proud, impulsive, and young. Maybe she had misunderstood more than she realized. Our talk went on longer than I expected. The house around me was silent. Everyone had gone to their rooms. I sat there in the dim light of my phone, listening to this city girl's voice from miles away. There was something peaceful about it, as though for the first time in a long while, someone was speaking without judgment or expectation. When the clock struck midnight, she finally said, "Thank you, Auntie, for listening." I smiled softly, even though she couldn't see me. Sometimes, I told her, we just need to talk. It doesn't always matter about what. After we said goodbye, I lay down beside my sleeping child, but my mind wouldn't rest. I kept replaying her words, her tone, the way she spoke about Rihanna with both pain and care. That night felt different. I didn't know why a stranger's voice had touched me so deeply, but something in my heart whispered that this wasn't the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of something new. Maybe it was the start of an unexpected friendship. Maybe it was destiny's quiet way of filling the spaces I never knew were empty. Whatever it was, that call stayed with me. Even as I closed my eyes, I could still hear Huma's soft voice echoing in the dark, and I knew that my life, though I didn't realize it then, had just changed in the most unexpected way. Days passed after that first call, but Huma's voice stayed in my mind like a quiet echo that refused to fade. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just a simple conversation that would end there. Yet every evening, when the house grew silent and the night air turned cool, I found myself thinking of her again. She had said so much that day, yet I felt there was more she hadn't said. I didn't know what made me do it, but one night I sent her a short message. Asterisk, are you okay? Asterisk, she replied almost instantly, as if she had been waiting. From that night on, our talks became a small, secret part of my daily life. We started speaking regularly, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for hours. It was strange how easily we spoke, as if we had known each other for years. Huma was younger than me, but her thoughts often felt older, deeper. She spoke of her city life, of noise and lights and people who were always in a hurry. I told her about the village, of the open fields, the quiet stars, and the peace that came after long days of work. Our worlds were so different, yet somehow our hearts found the same rhythm. There was something gentle about those late-night conversations. I would sit on the charpai near the courtyard, wrapping my shawl around my shoulders, and whisper into the phone so no one in the house would hear. My husband would be at work, my son asleep. The house would be dark except for the faint light from my screen. Sometimes Huma would laugh softly at something I said, and that laughter would fill the silence like music. Other times, she would talk about her loneliness, about how people around her never really understood her. Those were the nights I listened quietly, offering comfort in small words. I didn't tell anyone about our friendship. Not because I felt guilty, but because I knew people wouldn't understand. In our family, life was simple, too simple. A woman's world was her home, her husband, her child. No one would believe that a friendship could bloom between two women who had met by chance, separated by distance and age, yet connected by emotion. So I kept it to myself, guarding it like a fragile secret. As days turned into weeks, our bond grew stronger. Huma started sharing things she said she had never told anyone. She spoke of her fears, her dreams, her regrets. I could hear her smile through the phone, and sometimes I could hear the tears she tried to hide. She said talking to me made her feel lighter, like she could finally breathe again. I didn't realize it then, but she had become a kind of light for me too, a voice that brought comfort after long, quiet days. Sometimes she would tease me for being too serious. "Auntie, you sound like my diary." She'd laugh, and I would laugh too, even though a part of me wondered if she knew how much her words meant to me. There were moments when I felt like a friend, a sister, and even a mother to her, all at once. She had a way of making me feel needed, and that feeling was both beautiful and dangerous. One evening, while we were talking, she suddenly went quiet. I asked what was wrong. After a long pause, she said, "You know, Auntie, you're the only person who really listens to me." Those words touched something deep inside me. I didn't reply for a few seconds, afraid my voice might give away the emotion I felt. I only said sometimes that's all we need, someone who listens. As the nights went on, I began to realize how much I looked forward to hearing her voice. It became a rhythm my heart quietly followed. Even on days when we didn't speak, I caught myself checking my phone, waiting. I knew I shouldn't let it mean so much, but it did. It was strange how quickly a connection can grow, how two lives miles apart could begin to depend on each other for something as simple as peace. I didn't know what the future held for this friendship, or if it would even last, but at that moment it felt real, it felt right. And in a world where I often felt unseen, Huma's voice reminded me that I still mattered. It was late winter when things began to change. The nights grew colder, the air sharper, and yet my evenings felt warmer than ever because of our talks. By now, it had become a routine. Huma would call after dinner, sometimes even before I had finished putting my son to sleep. Her "hello, Auntie" had become the most familiar sound of my nights, but somewhere deep inside I could feel the shift. The calls were longer, the pauses heavier, and the laughter softer. There was something new in her voice, something I couldn't name, but could always feel. She started asking more about my life, my husband, my marriage. I didn't think much of it at first. She seemed genuinely curious, like someone who wanted to understand the person she was speaking to. But one night, her question caught me off guard. "Auntie, are you happy?" she asked quietly. I didn't know what to say. Happiness was something I hadn't thought about in years. I had a family, a home, a husband who worked hard. Wasn't that what happiness was supposed to be? But that night, her question stayed with me long after the call ended. The next evening, she told me she had been thinking about me all day. She said my voice brought her peace, that it made her forget the noise of the city. I didn't know how to respond to that either. I wasn't used to being anyone's peace. Still, her words made my heart ache in a way I couldn't explain. I started noticing little things, how my day felt empty until I heard from her, how I smiled when her name flashed on my screen, how silence without her voice felt heavier than before. One evening, as we talked, my husband came home earlier than usual. I quickly ended the call and pretended to be asleep. My heart raced for reasons I didn't want to admit. The next morning, while cooking breakfast, I kept thinking about what would happen if anyone ever found out about our nightly talks. It wasn't wrong. I told myself it was just friendship. But still, something about it felt like a secret I couldn't share. That night, Huma sounded different. Her voice trembled as she said, "Auntie, I wish I could meet you once." I laughed nervously and said, "You live so far, Beta. How would that even happen?" She went quiet for a moment, then said, "If someone wants to meet, distance doesn't matter." There was a kind of intensity in her tone that made my chest tighten. I tried to brush it off, but the thought of meeting her stayed in my mind. Days passed and she kept mentioning it. Just once, she'd say, "I want to see the person who understands me the most." I didn't know what to say anymore. A part of me wanted to say yes to see the face behind the voice that had become so dear to me, but another part of me knew it was wrong, that it would break the fragile line between friendship and something else. One afternoon, she sent a message that said, "I'm coming to your town next week." My heart skipped a beat. I read the message over and over, not knowing how to react. Should I be happy, afraid, curious? I didn't know. That night I didn't answer her call. I lay awake thinking of everything that could go wrong. What if someone saw us? What would people think? What would my husband say? But when she called again the next day, I couldn't resist. Her voice sounded hurt, and she said softly, "Did I do something wrong?" That was enough to make my hesitation melt away. I told her no, that everything was fine, and before I knew it, we were back to talking for hours. The plan to meet came up again, and this time I didn't stop her. Maybe curiosity won, maybe loneliness did. When the day finally came, I felt nervous in a way I hadn't felt in years. My hands shook as I waited for her message. She said she was nearby, that she would be there in an hour. I didn't know what I would say when I saw her, or how I would explain it to anyone if someone asked. All I knew was that my heart was beating too fast for a simple friendship. That evening, when the sun dipped below the fields and the village quieted, I stood near the gate, waiting. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was doing something right or stepping into something I wouldn't be able to undo. And as I saw a small figure approaching in the fading light, my breath caught. The voice that had lived in my phone was suddenly real, standing right in front of me. The moment I saw her standing at the gate, time seemed to pause. She was smaller than I had imagined, wearing a simple dress and holding her phone tightly in her hand. Her eyes searched mine, full of emotions I couldn't name. Relief, nervousness, maybe even affection. I didn't know what to say. For months, I had only known her through a voice in my ear, a gentle presence that existed between silence and words. But now she was real, standing just a few feet away, breathing the same air. I looked around quickly to make sure no one in the family saw her. My heart was racing. I stepped closer and whispered, "Come inside before someone sees you." She nodded quietly, her eyes wide as if she couldn't believe she was finally here. I led her to the small corner of the courtyard near the old neem tree, where we often sat in the evenings. It felt strange, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked at me the way someone looks at a long, lost friend. Then she smiled softly and said, "You look exactly how I imagined." I laughed nervously, brushing her words away, but my cheeks warmed. We sat there talking, just as we always did on the phone, but now every word carried a different kind of weight. I could see her expressions, her smile, the way her eyes moved when she spoke. It made everything feel more real, more alive. We talked about everything, about her city life, my village, our families, our dreams. But beneath those words, there was a silence that neither of us addressed. It was the kind of silence that comes when two hearts begin to understand something they're afraid to admit. Every time she looked at me, I felt a strange pull, as if her gaze could read the thoughts I was trying to hide. Hours passed without us realizing it. The sun began to set, painting the courtyard in golden light. My son was still asleep, and the house was quiet. Huma's voice had grown softer. "You know," she said, "I thought you wouldn't really meet me." I smiled faintly and said, "Even I didn't think I would." She looked at me, and in that look, there was something raw, something that made my chest tighten. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. "I feel safe with you," she whispered. "Like I can be myself." I froze, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said that to me before, not even my husband. For years, I had been a wife, a mother, a daughter, in-law, but with Huma, I was just me. And that feeling of being seen, truly seen, was both beautiful and frightening. I told her she should go before it got too dark, but she didn't move. She just sat there, staring at the ground, her fingers tracing the edge of her phone. "Can I stay a little longer?" she asked softly. I hesitated but nodded. The moments that followed felt suspended in time. She talked about her loneliness, how her friends didn't understand her, how she felt like the world was too heavy. I listened quietly, my heart aching for her. Before leaving, she stood up and said, "You're more than a friend to me, Auntie. You're my peace." Her words hit something deep inside me. I wanted to tell her not to say that she didn't understand what she was doing to me. But I couldn't. I just watched as she walked away, her figure fading into the dusk. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every word, every look, every small gesture. I told myself it was just affection, just care, but my heart knew better. Something had changed. I found myself missing her even more now that I had seen her. The distance between us suddenly felt unbearable. The next few days, she called again and again. Our talks grew more emotional, more intense. She told me she wished she could stay with me forever, away from the noise of her city, away from everyone else. I laughed it off, but a part of me secretly wished the same. It was wrong, I knew. Yet, for the first time in years, I felt alive. What had started as a simple friendship was becoming something deeper, something that both scared and comforted me. I didn't know where this would lead, but I couldn't stop it anymore. Huma had become a part of my world, a part I couldn't let go of even if I tried. After that day, nothing felt the same again. The world around me looked familiar, yet something deep within had shifted. Every corner of my home seemed to hold her presence. When I cooked, I remembered her laughter. When I sat alone at night, I could almost hear her voice whispering through the still air. The quiet had changed. It was no longer peaceful, it was heavy with longing. Huma began calling more often, sometimes twice a day. Our conversations stretched endlessly from morning greetings to late night whispers. I told myself it was harmless, that it was only friendship, but deep down I knew the truth. There was an invisible thread between us now, something that neither of us dared to name. One evening, she said she missed me. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I missed her too, but admitting that felt dangerous, so I said nothing. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that speaks louder than words. Then she sighed softly and said, "You don't know how much you mean to me." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those words, about how they made my heart flutter and ache at the same time. It felt wrong, but also right in a way I couldn't explain. I wondered if she felt the same confusion, the same pull between affection and restraint. Days passed, and the boundary between us blurred even more. She began sharing every detail of her day, what she ate, where she went, how she felt, and I found myself doing the same. I told her things I hadn't told anyone, my fears, my doubts, the loneliness I had buried under routine. She listened with a tenderness that made me feel safe, understood, and alive. But the more we talked, the more restless I became. I started waiting for her messages like someone waits for rain after a long drought. Every notification made my heart jump. I tried to hide it, even from myself, but my mind revolved around her. My husband noticed that I seemed distracted. One night, he asked softly, "You're always on your phone these days. Is something wrong?" I forced a smile and said no. But guilt sat heavy in my chest. Huma began to sense my hesitation. One evening, she asked, "Are you afraid someone will find out about us?" The question startled me. I didn't know what us meant anymore. Were we just friends, or had we crossed some invisible line neither of us wanted to acknowledge? I told her she was imagining things, but my trembling voice betrayed me. She grew quiet for a while after that. A few days passed with no messages, no calls. The silence hurt more than I expected. It felt like something vital had been taken from me. I tried to convince myself that it was better this way, that distance would help. But the truth was, I missed her terribly. Then one night my phone lit up again. It was her. "I couldn't stay away," she said softly. "I tried, but I can't." Hearing her voice again filled me with both relief and fear. I didn't know whether to welcome her back or push her away, but my heart made the choice before my mind could. We fell back into our rhythm, as if those silent days had never happened. Our bond grew deeper, more emotional. She started saying things like, "You're my only real family," and "If you ever leave me, I'll break." Those words frightened me. I wanted to remind her that I had a life, a family, a world beyond her, but somehow I couldn't. I didn't want to hurt her, and maybe I didn't want to lose her either. One night, she confessed something that made my breath stop. "I love you, Auntie," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Not the way a daughter loves, but something more. My heart pounded. I didn't know what to say. Silence filled the space between us. I could feel tears in my eyes, not from anger or shame, but from the weight of what I had just heard, and the truth that I could no longer deny. That night, I didn't reply. I turned off my phone and stared into the darkness, my thoughts tangled in a storm of emotions. I knew something had gone too far. But even as guilt settled in my chest, another feeling whispered quietly beneath it, a feeling I didn't dare to name, but one that refused to fade away. The days after her confession felt heavier than any I had known. I woke up each morning carrying the weight of her words "I love you," not like a daughter, but something more. They echoed in my mind, slipping into every quiet moment, every thought I tried to bury. I told myself it was wrong to think about it, that I had a family, a husband, a child, and a life that could not be shaken by a single sentence. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase her voice from my heart. Huma kept her distance for a few days. There were no calls, no messages. I thought maybe she regretted what she said, or maybe she was waiting for me to respond. Every night I stared at my phone, fighting the urge to reach out. But I didn't. I wanted her to be the one to speak first, and then, one evening, she finally did. Her message was short, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things strange between us." Reading those words filled me with both relief and pain. I wanted to tell her that it was okay, that I understood, but I also knew that pretending nothing had changed would be a lie. Still, I couldn't stay silent. I replied, "You didn't hurt me, Huma. You just said what you felt. That's not wrong." She called immediately after reading it. Her voice trembled when she said, "Then don't leave me." That plea broke something inside me. I didn't know how to answer. I told her I wasn't leaving, but that we needed to be careful that people wouldn't understand our closeness. She went quiet for a long time, then said, "I don't care what they understand. I just don't want to lose you." Those words, though simple, carried the power to shatter all my defenses. In the weeks that followed, our bond deepened in silence. We didn't speak as often, but when we did, every word carried more emotion than before. Sometimes she'd message me late at night, "Are you awake?" And I would always be. It was as if our hearts had learned to find each other even in stillness. She would tell me about her dreams, her fears, her desire to move somewhere far away where no one could judge her. I would listen quietly, torn between wanting to comfort her and wanting to protect both of us from what we had become. Then one night, something changed again. She called me in tears. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I can't pretend this is just friendship." I froze. I could hear the pain in her voice, the struggle she was living with. She told me she felt lost, that her feelings for me had grown into something she couldn't control. I didn't know how to calm her. Every word I said felt small compared to the storm inside her. I told her she needed time, that she was young, that maybe what she felt was only attachment, not love. But she only cried harder and said, "You don't understand. You changed me." That night, after she hung up, I sat in the dark, trembling. The village was silent, my family asleep, and yet inside me, everything was loud. I knew this couldn't continue. I couldn't let my life fall apart. I had responsibilities, people who depended on me. But how could I let her go when she had become a part of my days, my nights, my thoughts? Over the next few days, I tried to distance myself. I answered her messages late, kept my replies short, avoided long calls. She noticed. Her tone changed softer, sadder, as if she knew what I was trying to do. Then one evening, she sent a voice message that made my heart ache. "If this is goodbye," she said quietly, "just tell me once. Don't leave me wondering." I couldn't even listen to it all at once. I stopped halfway, tears blurring my eyes. I didn't reply that night or the next. She called several times, but I let the phone ring. Each ring felt like a heartbeat I was trying to silence. And then, one morning, her messages stopped. My phone stayed silent for days. The quiet that followed was unbearable, heavier than guilt, deeper than loneliness. Weeks later, I heard from Rihanna that Huma had moved away from the city for work. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded and pretended not to care. But every night when the house fell asleep, I still found myself staring at the empty screen, waiting for a name that never appeared again. Life slowly returned to its old rhythm, but something inside me never did. Some nights I would whisper her name into the dark, just to hear how it sounded. I knew she was gone, and maybe that was for the best, but in the quiet corners of my heart, her voice still lived, soft, trembling, unforgettable. It was a reminder that sometimes love doesn't arrive to stay. Sometimes it only comes to show us the parts of ourselves we never knew existed.